Waiama was a beautiful village surrounded by rolling hills and lush green trees. The people of Waiama were kind, hardworking, and deeply devoted to their faith. At the center of their lives was the Temple of God Ministry, a massive church with tall white walls that glistened in the sunlight. Pastor Jude, the church's leader, was loved by everyone. People traveled from far and wide to listen to him preach and watch him perform miracles. He prayed for the sick, and they were healed. He blessed the poor, and their lives turned around. Pastor Jude seemed perfect, and the villagers gave him gifts, money, and endless praise. But just a short walk away, in a much smaller building, stood another church, the Ministry of Deliverance. This church was run by Pastor John, a humble man with a kind smile and a heart full of faith. His church didn't have the big crowds or the loud music. On Sundays, only a few people came to worship. Pastor John didn't care about fame or fortune, all he wanted was to share God's word. But no matter how hard Pastor John prayed or how much he tried, his church stayed small. He often wondered why. One night, Pastor John knelt by his bed, his hands clasped tightly together. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why is my church not growing? Please help me understand." As the room grew silent, a sudden chill filled the air. Pastor John's eyes widened as he felt an invisible presence. He didn't see anything, but deep in his heart, he knew this was a warning. Something was wrong, but he didn't know what. Pastor Jude smiled as he walked into his grand home that night. His room was filled with expensive furniture and shiny decorations. But hidden behind a bookshelf was a secret door. He opened it and stepped into a dark, cold room lit by a single candle. Inside the room was an altar covered in strange symbols. Pastor Jude knelt before it, muttering strange words. On the altar were photos and objects that belonged to people from the village, including Pastor John. "I will take it all," Pastor Jude said, his voice cold. "Their blessings, their prayers, it will all be mine." Unbeknownst to the villagers, Pastor Jude's power didn't come from God. His success came from stealing the blessings of others through dark rituals. The next day, Pastor John woke up feeling weak and confused. His prayers had been strong, but something was blocking them. He didn't know that Pastor Jude was the one behind it all. But Pastor John was not one to give up. He decided to pray differently. "Lord, show me what is hidden. Help me see what's blocking my prayers." At that moment, Pastor John felt a warmth in his chest, a small spark of hope. He didn't know it yet, but his prayers were about to change everything. Meanwhile, Pastor Jude continued his rituals, confident that no one would ever discover his secret. But that night, as he prepared for another ritual, something strange happened. The air around him grew heavy, and the symbols on his altar began to glow faintly. "What is this?" Pastor Jude muttered, fear creeping into his voice. Unseen by him, Pastor John's prayers were creating a spiritual shield. The dark powers Pastor Jude relied on began to waver. The next morning, the villagers gathered at the Temple of God for Pastor Jude's Sunday service. As usual, the crowd was large, and people were excited to hear him speak. But as Pastor Jude began his sermon, something unexpected happened. His voice cracked, and he stumbled over his words. Sweat dripped down his face as his body started to tremble. "Are you okay, Pastor?" someone from the crowd asked. I'm fine," he stammered, but deep down, he wasn't. A strange force was taking hold of him, and he couldn't control it. As the days passed, the village of Waiama slowly returned to peace. The curse grip that Pastor Jude once had over the land had been broken, and the stolen blessings were now returned to their rightful places. Pastor John's ministry of deliverance began to grow in ways he could never have imagined. People traveled from far and wide to hear him preach, seeking both spiritual healing and guidance. His prayers for the village were now answered in ways beyond what he had ever hoped for. Yet, in the silence of his own heart, Pastor John remained humble. He knew that his success wasn't due to his own power but to the will of God. Each morning, he woke up with a deep sense of gratitude, reflecting on the lessons he had learned from Pastor Jude's betrayal and downfall. He had witnessed firsthand the dangers of seeking power through deceit, and it was a reminder that true strength came from unwavering faith and honesty. One quiet evening, as Pastor John was preparing for the evening service, a mysterious traveler arrived at his door. She was a woman, cloaked in a deep blue robe with intricate patterns. Her face was partially covered by a veil, but her eyes shone brightly with wisdom and experience. She introduced herself as Ilara, a wanderer who had heard of the miraculous changes that had occurred in Waiama. "I have heard much of your faith, Pastor," Ilara said, her voice calm but filled with strength. "I have been searching for someone like you." Pastor John was taken aback but welcomed her into the church. The two sat down to speak, and Ilara shared her story. She was a seeker of truth, traveling from village to village, looking for people who understood the balance between light and darkness. Pastor John listened intently as she spoke of ancient secrets and lost knowledge that could protect the world from future dark fortune. Days turned into weeks, and Ilara's presence in the village began to stir something deep within Pastor John's heart. Though she was kind and wise, there was something unsettling about her, a subtle feeling that all was not as it seemed. One night, as the two walked through the forest near the church, Ilara spoke of an ancient prophecy that involved the balance of good and evil in the world. "The prophecy speaks of a great battle," Ilara said, "one where the forces of light and darkness will clash once more, and only a chosen one will be able to restore balance." Pastor John felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had already witnessed the destruction that darkness could cause. He feared that Ilara's prophecy might bring even more danger to Waiama. A hidden truth revealed. The next morning, Pastor John woke up to find Ilara missing. Her absence was strange, and a growing sense of unease filled him. As he walked through the church, a strange symbol etched into the wooden floor caught his attention. It was the same symbol he had seen on Pastor Jude's hidden altar, the symbol of dark forces. Realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. Ilara was no ordinary traveler, she was connected to the very darkness that had once threatened his village. She had come to find the one who had defeated Pastor Jude, to harness his strength for a far darker purpose. Determined not to let this new threat destroy everything he had worked for, Pastor John gathered his congregation for a special service, calling upon God's protection and guidance. His faith, strengthened by the trials he had already endured, gave him the courage to face whatever lay ahead. That evening, as nightfall approached, Ilara returned to the church. But now, she was no longer the kind woman who had entered the village weeks before. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent energy, and her once calm demeanor had been replaced by a powerful, dark presence. She raised her arms, and the church trembled as shadows twisted around her. "You think you have won," Ilara hissed, "but darkness is eternal. It has only been waiting for the right moment to rise again." Without hesitation, Pastor John stepped forward, his heart filled with the light of God. "I have already faced darkness and won," he declared. "No evil can have power over me as long as I stand in faith." Ilara sneered and summoned dark energy, but Pastor John's prayers created a shield of golden light around him. The battle between light and darkness erupted, the forces clashing with unimaginable power. The walls of the church shook, and the heavens seemed to open up as both Pastor John and Ilara fought for the fate of Waiama. As the battle raged on, Pastor John's faith grew stronger. He knew that the light of truth and righteousness was his greatest weapon. With a final, powerful prayer, he called upon God's strength, and a brilliant flash of light enveloped the church. The shadows surrounding Ilara shattered, and the darkness that had possessed her was driven away. Ilara screamed as the light consumed her, and with one final cry, she vanished into the air, never to return. The church fell silent, and Pastor John collapsed to his knees, exhausted but victorious. The following morning, the sun rose over Waiama with a renewed sense of peace. The church, once again filled with light, stood as a symbol of the victory of faith over darkness. Pastor John's ministry continued to grow, not just as a place of worship, but as a beacon of hope for all who sought the truth. Though the challenges were far from over, Pastor John knew that as long as he remained faithful, nothing could overcome the power of light. The village of Waiama had been saved once more, and its people, now stronger than ever, knew that true victory comes not from the strength of one, but from the unity of faith and righteousness. Kindly subscribe to this video, like this video, share and drop your comment, and I will see you in my next video.